I'm good to start. All right.
All right, awesome. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our What Makes a Good Redesign workshop. My name is Funing. I'm a e-board member for Wellesley product and also an organizer for this designathon event. And we are so delighted to have Mike Dan as our workshop host to give us a presentation on what makes a good redesign. So I will hand over to Mike, and maybe you can introduce yourself first, and then we can kick off this event. Yeah, and also just one more thing, that if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or just PM me directly. Either way is fine. Yeah. So Mike, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So sure, I'll be going over what makes a good redesign in particular. And the topic at hand will be through a recent Facebook redesign. And sure, as to real quick. Sure. So currently I'm a student at ArtCenter where I study interaction design. And previously I was at Rutgers studying computer science. In terms of pre-professional wise, I've been at this startup called Justice Text, which is a Techstars company or like a more accelerator backed one. And then UNICEF, where I do nonprofit work. Sure, to get started, plus here's an overview of the things at hand from an introduction, overview, then just like a wrap up overall. And then if time permits or people are otherwise interested, we're able to have a discussion about this further. So here's the introduction real quick. So before we get started, I'd like to talk about the overall team members who are involved with this overall. So at the very beginning, we have it so that there's Jeff Tian and Julie Zoa respectively. I'll go through like their general backgrounds. So generally speaking, Jeff previously in the 90s, he was working like at like an internet startup as a whole. And then he eventually broke through in terms of creating his own design agency in which he worked in redesigning Medium altogether. And that before that agency was eventually picked up and acquired by Facebook now. And Julie, on the other hand, she was actually the first intern at Facebook. And since then, she's been promoted afterwards. And she was actually right about now when she did this design, like director product design type work, she worked across newsfeed, notifications, mobile, Facebook, paper, workplace, among other type projects at this point. But these would be the more like directors that are like more or less steering the ship of this project, in which they're going about redesigning something altogether. As for other people, these aren't the most recent posts, but this would be Andy Chung and Brian Craig respectively, in which Andy, he recently worked, previous to this, he worked on Facebook Rooms on their Facebook Messenger app. And Brian, on the other hand, he was previously at Apple, in which he worked on the Apple ecosystem altogether. And he redesigned iTunes 11, designed UI and icons for Apple TV, among various other projects at hand. Then moving forward, we have it so that here's Brandon Walken and Seth Kurd respectively. So for all these people, they're all in the design team more or less. But so Brandon, previous to this, he co-designed the Facebook logo previous to this, in addition to creating the mobile menu bar for the Facebook app. And he eventually pushed Facebook Paper, which was previously mentioned on Julie's team, in which it was known as Paper, which was an iOS only app meant to replace newspapers. Unfortunately, discontinued at this time, but that's about Brandon's expertise. And as for Seth, he's a creative director at a creative studio he helped build out, and they've since served clients such as Facebook and Uber. So let's get started. So these are some people who aren't on the team more or less. Well, they're embedded on engineering, PM, and more different type ones. But speaking to this would be that this was from Andy's initial video of this, in which he highlighted more people who were not on the immediate design team. So start this off with a video by Julie, in which she's more or less talking through the project as a whole, and just like a preview as to like this initial design altogether. So for context for this was a part of when Stanford invited an entrepreneurial thought leader speaking engagement, and this would be a snippet of what Julie talked about.
For the people problem of not everything that I see in
also, does that
for
audio
the
work?
people problem of not everything that I see in newsfeed is likable, and I want to be able to express, other emotions. We wanted to make sure that this was actually a problem that many people faced, and that the solution that we had would actually directly address it. So we looked at, we talked to a lot of users. We had them go through their feeds and describe to us, for each story, what was their reaction, what were they feeling, sort of like a free flow, tell us what's going through their minds as they're going through their feeds. And, a lot of times people will say, well, there should be more ways for me to just say something, because what I like about the like button is that it's so simple. I don't have to, go and comment and the keyboard comes up and I have to two-handedly type something. I like the fact that I can just in one gesture kind of scroll through things and then, say that I like it. But the only thing that I can do is like, and there's got to be, other ways for me to express other emotions. We also looked at, how are people, how are people expressing that they don't like something today? And we looked at the stickers that people were using and leaving as comments, as well as the emoji, and what were kind of the most popular ones, were, how frequently were people just leaving a simple sticker or a simple emoji. And finally, we looked at also short comments. So we looked at how many comments were just 1 or 2 words, and all they expressed was like awesome, or like that sucks, or a very, very short phrase that we felt we could encapsulate. So with all of that, we decided, we looked at all that data, we looked at what were the most common emotions that people wanted to express, and we designed something that we felt was sort of fulfilled that criteria of being really, really lightweight, so you can still do it with one hand and one gesture. It's not like multiple taps. And we also, taking all of the data that we had gotten from what were the most common things that people, the common reactions that they had, we built the reactions product. And so you just scrub through, and we took the top most, what we wanted to be universal reactions, and that's the options that you see in that tray.
So pretty much that was just like a broad overview of what's to come in terms of this conversation, but more or less in the beginning, they did a bunch of research in which it eventually informed designs that they would make, and then eventually pushing it to engineering teams. Oh, shoot, that's the wrong spot. Sorry, I'm gonna refresh real quick. Percent again. All right, so moving forward for next one, at least the
top most.
All right, so pretty much continuing where you left off. So I'm gonna treat this as if like you don't know what Facebook is. So like leaving off there. So this is lifted from their About Us, but we build technologies that help people connect with friends and family, find communities, and grow businesses. And in short, this is pretty much social media that connects people from different outlets of media from said aforementioned groups. And now they're scaling many verticals like AR, VR, among many other things. Now, ask again, what is Facebook? So now accounting for the scale of this project in particular, it's an outlet that highlights life's highs and lowest of lows, in addition to like every emotion in between. Because for the background of this, which I'll be talking about is like the overall project at hand for design, and in particular what they did well. So back then in 2009, Facebook introduced likes altogether, in which you're able to scroll through a feed like posts, and it's more or less an acknowledgement of like you seeing what your friends have been up to, seeing like posts they made, engagements they've been up to, in addition to more things. Similar to whether it's like Instagram feeds more or less, LinkedIn, in addition, Twitter, in addition towards different social media outlets as a whole. Now, for the problem, let's revisit the previous definition sought out. So it's an online social media that highlights life's highest of highs and then lowest of lows and every emotion in between. So pretty much for this, let's go directly to one of the directors of design who had a better speaking point to us. So pretty much in his words, not everything in life is likable in particular, is as you can see on people's feeds, not everything is just like glitz and glamour, like something to be celebrated, and not everything is like all happy, cheery all the time. And as a result, it was embedded on like his team that he wanted to build something out in which they'd be able to build out something that's more expressive in terms of accounting for all the subtle nuances, and then eventually building out a product in general. And a follow-up quote would be, like all good design, the process of getting to a simple solution is complex. Because looking back, it's really easy to see like Facebook reactions in particular and being just like coming to a conclusion of like, oh, BuzzFeed has like these type emoticons, or Apple already has like this ecosystem of like all their emojis and other stuff. It's really easy like look back and reflect on that more or less. But through the processes of Jeff and his team, you can clearly see that they went through the efforts of rapid prototyping, a bunch of research, a bunch more. And in his case, he overall showcases not only like the end product overall, but all the trials and tribulations that came with failed designs, things that didn't work out among the product that finally came through. So pretty much the objective that was posed to him by Zuckerberg himself would be how to make the like button more expressive in particular. And this would be in terms of just like building it out in terms of different type emoticons that they would eventually explore, among many other things. But this would be more or less the brief that Zuckerberg had with Jeff and his team. Given that this was rather early on, then the solution would be, how might we? So this would be, so how might we statements are something in design together in which sometimes people design for things in which they want to see like problems they are able to solve for. So in this case, how might we create something that emphasizes with people and their life events? And how might we create something seamless as the like button previously? In terms of this, adding something such as reactions or whichever direction they end up building out would prove to be something entirely different, because Facebook has billions of users at a time, like 2+ billion, and they needed something that's universal to everybody, as a simple like button is just like a good job or something simple as that. But when it comes to building something different, it might pose a challenge in terms of how they eventually go about it. So here's what was eventually built out, in which if you see like Facebook nowadays, it's just like these 6 icons that represent the wide range of human emotions nowadays in terms of what Facebook eventually presented, in terms of what you can see here from like love, wow, sad, and angry in particular. But it wasn't a straight shot in terms of start to finish, they end up with this, but it came from several rounds of just research, design, just like going through this cycle of what would be regularly like, whether it's like the double diamond method or an agile development process. They went through the cycle of rapidly going through research, going through design and development, and if it doesn't go through, repeating the process over again. So pretty much what might be the challenges? So the challenges that they highlight at least would be designing across different devices. So this would be across the different ecosystem of Facebook, in which they're embedded across tablet, mobile, and desktop. And then speaking to previous terms, design a seamless universal experience as to not be disruptive or too abrupt in terms of things. Because with this, as previously mentioned, this would be a new endeavor altogether, as building out emojis in particular is going to be difficult at times, because for addressing point one, it has to be able to address all these different devices. Then in the second point, it has to not be too foreign to people altogether, as with playing around with the thumbs up, as previously said, it's more or less just like, okay, you're giving someone like good job, they did something great. But on the other hand, it might be difficult to see which emoticons or like faces to go for with reactions, as there is a wide range of human emotions. And with having said that, it's not immediately clear as to which ones they want to focus on. So they definitely reached out to research professionals, among other things, in terms of imposing something that's not too disruptive and being like foreign altogether to people. So moving forward, they went with a sort of two-pronged approach in terms of dividing the problem up towards what are the reactions that they'll use beyond like, and then how will people input and consume reactions. In terms of the first one, it's in terms of building out the physical reactions, doing the research that that supports that more or less. And more or less for consuming reactions, that would be how, when you interact with a Facebook post now, you click on the like button per se, and then you have the capability to hover and select a bunch of things from the angry to like to the various type ones. And they were also guided by principles in which they would provide a general direction for a general team. And we going over principles that they worked with and how it informed decisions. Sure, so how they went about doing it was with principles combined with insights from more empirical research and data sets. And in terms of who they worked alongside, it would be researchers, content strategists, and engineers. So speaking of researchers, it's inclusive of not only UX researchers, which are embedded in like the UX/product design scope, but also more just like people who are in the communication space that have previously been contracted with Facebook, more or less. Content strategists are, more broadly speaking, what you would call a UX writer at certain companies, in which they work with the type and the font of, the type and the speech of words that come through, in which they have to make sure that the general feel and sake of things give a general vibe when it comes to like not only copywriting it, but when you eventually execute and go for it. And then lastly, we have engineers who eventually get the push from design, and they have to work in sync with one another. So in terms of looking over what went well here, so what they overall did well in is in terms of working along like guiding directions in terms of what they did want to go in and where they didn't. That was more or less guided by the principles at hand. As you'll see in the incoming slides, that with these principles, it gave them a fundamental, the fundamentals as to where they want to go from here and how they incorporate these functions. Moving forward, number two definitely has been great in terms of they're working cross-functional teams in which people are able to fill in the gaps of knowledge for one another and be able to move across in like these type environments. And with that, it goes back to it's like how research informs design, and design eventually works with engineers and in sync with like all these different type teams in general. So the last one, but not least, would be wanting to build something that empathizes with the end user. So I think this especially works well because whether you're a head of design or like a junior designer, or you're just like looking for internships altogether, it's been heavily emphasized to like build out something in which your storytelling stuff, in addition towards just putting yourself into who you're designing for at end of day, as that doesn't only shine through when you're applying for internships, but eventually when you're out in the workforce as well. So here's moving on to 2. So 2 would be here are some initial guiding for the overall reactions. So 1 and 2 overall would be that reaction should be universally understood, and in which number 2 would be reaction should be widely used and expressive. So in terms of universally understood, it's in terms of
1 second.
So in terms of how the universally understood means like smiling means like a happy type emoticon, whereas like a sad or crying face might indicate like otherwise a negative emotion. And then anger with like red and just like different types of stuff. Whereas used and expressive, it would be that Facebook wanted an extension of the like button more or less, because with 2 billion plus users, it might not be immediate or in terms of as easy or adaptable as users are more familiar with something at hand. And for something more foreign to them to come all together, it'll definitely like take like time overall. I think the closest connection I could have with this is that Instagram implemented like stories initially, and then eventually people are used like more like Snapchat and other type apps, but then they eventually like grew more used to it and like using it more altogether. But this would be the challenge that Facebook would be facing a few years back. So in moving forward, here are some different type of approaches that they did. So they looked at sticker emojis that people use on Messenger and more. The most used search terms when they're trying to find those type stickers, and top short comments, or just like comments that people leave on like posts and other things across not only the US, but in addition towards just like internationally as a whole. So for reference, here would be stickers for what was most popular long times. Here's respectively the most used search terms for said stickers. Ranges from more like happy, sad, laughing, angry, among different emotions. And from there, this would be the top short comments. In reference for this would be for the US at least, but they also took an anonymized like global sample of everyone in terms of doing international surveys, talking to people, and working with an embedded like internationalization team, in which it's a big perspective of where Facebook is really, because for Facebook, they're based in the States, based in Valley and everything. And there's that really like US centric sort of view when it comes to things. And they have to consider just like their different sites based in like, whether it's Asia, Europe, and like all different sets where they're based, and being able to design for that altogether and conduct research in all the respective places. And in terms of this, they shortlisted the things from what initially was to these handful altogether. And I'd say that the ones that didn't quite make the cut were is the confused one and the yay one. The confused one would be nobody really used it at hand. And then yay has too much overlap with the haha and like in particular. Because with these designs, it's like a subtle change in like how you draw it will just like make it like seem like one another. Because you're more, because from my understanding, they made it so that the emotes for like more haha is like similar to like altogether. And there's just like too much overlap in terms of having too much similar structure in not only the design, but the eventual like implementation when people would use it. So in terms of this, what they did well in terms of using mixed methods of research. And what I mean by this is like mixed methodologies in terms of like more qualitative and quantitative in terms of like doing surveys, asking people and interviewing them. And in addition to just like doing more evaluative research as the what has been done before and seeing how to move forward from there. And they also worked well in terms of refining and narrowing down these findings before finally coming to a conclusion of where they want to move forward from here. So approaches for illustrations wise, I'll skip to the next slide, but there is a lot that they did. So before we address that, here are some challenges that they face. Challenges, as previously said, it's more like the style and approach that's posed as a difficulty. Is with this difficulty would be that they had it so that they had to have like one overarching theme when it comes down to it. But at the same time, they found difficulty with having it so that there's too much overlap in designs. As previously said, one simple stroke and like it's really easy for one design to look like another and for users to be confused when they eventually like test or like test these out through like A/B testing or like other like mixed methods. Example here would be a set of 25 that they worked with. As you can see, they definitely played around in terms of not only like the hands, but like if they decide like have a hand or something in terms of that, in addition to just like general expressions more or less, playing around with like eyebrows in addition to just like circles and like other vector images more or less. We can see that they're able to subtly express 25 set emotions more or less. And it's a matter of seeing which ones mostly align with what they're aiming for. So this was backed up by, so they worked alongside a social communications professional. And in particular, they'd reach out to, I'm gonna butcher this name, but Dr. Keltner, in which they're a professor of social psych at UC Berkeley. And they previously consulted for Facebook for many other projects such as suicide prevention, breakup tool, and stickers in particular, because for these more sensitive type issues, it elicits a more like raw human emotion in particular. And Facebook was looking for just like help in terms of these respects, in terms of seeing how to go about designing for this and having to back it up with like more or less like this qualitative, quantitative type research. But as you can see here is just like some more raw emotions that go from all the way from like fear to surprise. So it's like, so more or less just like raw extremes for all these type of emotions and having build it out from there. So these would be the final iterations that would see. So what their processes was that the designers deployed pseudocode. So pseudocode is pretty much like, if trying to see how go about this if you're not too technical. So pretty much if you're like doing like coding more or less, like if you actually implement the code, it's just like typing it up and like doing it more or less. But when it comes to pseudocode, it's like setting more or less just like a framework up as like, okay, this is meant to be like a loop, this is, or just overhead would be just like giving a framework of like a position where everything is and how they want the engineering team to implement it, and then passing it off to engineering. And then that's how they would more or less go through just like these micro interactions as a whole. While the animator, as previously on the team, he would more or less just like be animating these less and just taking on that as a whole. And let's see. Also, in terms of final iterations, initially it was that you'd highlight one of these words overall, and then it would just like highlight like the word, and then you'd have to like one by one go through like each to see what it was. But that was rather cumbersome, as over time that the team eventually met with Zuckerberg himself, and he had suggested that why not just have it so that it just has all of this more or less, in which you're able to see all these at once. So I'd say an extension of what they did well is they continue to work with this mixed methodologies in addition towards validating their design through research, because through eventually just like doing all these designs, they needed to see that, oh, this isn't just like something they came up with out of nowhere, that they have things that support their findings and they can proceed with their designs altogether. Because some trouble that you might face if you don't like thoroughly research before you design would be just like, I guess on more extremes, it's like a failed product, but on lesser extremes, it's like maybe a failed like vertical you try to scale, or among other things. So this would be the guiding principle in terms of their systems. So this would be that reaction should be an extension of the like button, and reaction should not make existing behavior more difficult. And pretty much this would be something built out so that it doesn't leave a user like left in the dark in terms of being too left out of place and leaving users confused, because they don't want people to be disoriented in terms of people and to what their pre-existing like familiarity and comfort level. Here would be, sure. So here would be an initial prototype that Jeff's team built out, but this would more or less just showcase just like an early set. Yeah, it's just like him scrolling over just like different emotions as a whole, and then the thing more or less adjusts as they like scroll from like one side to the other. It's not share screen. I mean, not full screening. I mean. I can. Okay, I'm just gonna refresh real quick. Okay. And then, oh, I guess I'll just like hop out of presentation mode for a bit. Okay, sure. And then here moves on to the next quote, in which it's early concepts and initial attempts like these are purely educational. They teach us what works, but often more importantly, what doesn't. They reveal gaps, unknowns, and more. So in this respect, it's more just like backing up and going in terms of like research, how like environments like these in big tech in particular, where it's like you move fast and break things in big tech, as said by Zuckerberg, it's that in simpler terms that mistakes are rather natural in these type of settings, as you ultimately need to refine your work in terms of like testing things out before picking one that like suits your fancy in terms of what you actually want to put through. Then won't go over all of this, but this is just to show you like all the different type of testing and like their overall findings from all of this. And this was just like eventually coming to a close of what didn't work, what are things that need to be fixed, and troubleshoot it more or less, and seeing where they need to go from there. Then this would be talking to, yeah, I'll just skip for now. This would be more or less showcasing like design in particular. Okay, cool. So as you can see for this, it's more that this has it so that it's like a hover sort of feature in which initially they built it out so that you had to individually hover over each one and it shows you emotion. But as previously said, it was rather cumbersome and like a bunch of, I'd say it's like more interactions than need be, because whether it's like in UX or just like in general, people are rather disoriented when it's like something straightforward takes like a bunch of additional steps. And over time, it would not only like waste time, but like be an inconvenience over time. Then so it move on to consuming reactions more or less. And then this would be their initial approach in which it's shown that here are all the likes, here are the hearts, here are the laughs, and then the other respective ones. But it was rather overwhelming in terms of all the different amount at times and just having to accommodate for that. You could see that this type thing is on Facebook now, in which it's like you hover over like the current design. If you click on that, you can see this type thing. But from the onset, this is for more people who are interested in exploring more as to like all the emotes, rather than leaving it out in the open for just the person seeing like the emotes as a whole, like initially. So moving forward, these would be like failed iterations more or less. And it showcases like through design that there's a bunch of stuff that eventually never hits the market and never just like comes out more or less. And it showcases just like their thinking overall in terms of like different avenues they went down. For example, for this one in particular, they had it so that it shows like each person's profile and their respective ones. This one, it similar to the current one, but it's for all the emotes in particular. For this avenue, it was the previously shown one, too overwhelming. Then for this last one, it's sort of obscured by screen, but it's pretty much that instead of the comments and share, they just have comments and share as like icon buttons, more or less like a text bubble here and then an arrow respectively. In terms of things, they definitely did a bunch of like wires A/B testing and different type things in order to see like what eventually came through. And this would be the final element. So the final one had it so that it's the three most popular ones in particular. And it's supported by like another design would be if you have a friend per se. Like looking back at it now, it's like, oh, of course they have it. But back then it wasn't as like innovative or just like clear cut, I guess. So within that, they made it so that when your friends react to things, you can immediately see it like when you inspect it more or less. And you can see like, oh, your friend like Julie or something reacted to your post in particular. And then in terms of things, I would say that what this follows is more or less that design's rather iterative in terms of you continue to cycle more or less and continue to update, and how you just like go through the process and just like continue to try to innovate more or less. So this would be his final demo more or less. Showcase it real quick. Yeah, but for that one, it pretty much showcases like current the current thing of just being able to hover and see all those rather than the manual like one by one. Then secondly, here's the second one in which it's their which it's like an actual video they put out to demo this more or less. But yeah, but respectively for that one, I think it works well in terms of they didn't have to explicitly say what each thing did, but more or less demoed it through more like a user scenario of, hey, here's like this person's cute puppy that was uploaded, and an interaction of them like going through like bits and pieces of what a pet usually does. So in terms of what they did well here is that we continue to ideate different iterations, testing limits for these different type concepts and pushing forward with like what eventually worked out for them. Then to continue, I'd say that definitely still emphasize like working cross-functionally, as this time around they have more unconventional type roles now. They have like an animator and like, yeah, animator among engineers and like all these different type roles, but shows that how with UX design or just like design processes in general, you really don't know who you might be working with, and you have to be able to like work alongside these different teams and be able to collaborate in these type settings. And then lastly, I definitely hit home just like the design process is never over, and you're always just like continuing build and build out these type things. So in terms of things, here would be general conclusions, so or takeaways. So in terms of designers on this team, they led in terms of valuing research as a core part of their process overall, in addition to iterating on their design and validating this through testing, among other things. And definitely also place core empathy as a whole and designing it so that it aligns with what Facebook previously had, because their ecosystem has it so that there's likes as a whole, but they wanted to see like how this could be implemented within the current one and making it comfortable with the users currently and seeing how to go about that. And with having said that, corresponds with the last point, which would more or less be how to correspond and go about corroborating this in a larger market as big as Facebook is, with like 2 billion plus users. In terms of takeaways for you, I guess I would say whether you're a student or otherwise, in terms of this redesign shows a great format about how a team goes about design from start to finish, and how they more or less laid out a great way for a case study, more or less, in terms of here's the very raw, just like bits and pieces of like early stage research, moving to design, iterations upon design, and then final push to development. But they hone in on definitely things for both craft and research. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes you might see on like whether it's Twitter or like other forums, that oftentimes in your case studies you have to focus on either craft, either research, among different things, and how you have to focus on one over another. But in this case, you see that it's a fully fleshed out case overall, in which they showed all the things that didn't move forward, all the things that did, in a way where it was informed by research, in addition towards like their rationale overall, in addition to showing like the final like mock-up or prototype, in addition to these other type things. then I believe that's about all here, but if you're still interested in having a discussion or conversation about this, I'll be discussing recent developments in design and how they might correspond with what was previously talked about. But thanks everyone for your time today.
Thank you so much for Mike for this very fruitful presentation. I've certainly learned a lot about design related concepts, so thank you so much. And so for those of you guys interested in maybe having some further discussion with Mike, feel free to stay around, and then we can have like a more interactive and engaging session. And also in the meantime, I think now it's also a good time for anyone who has any questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat or also to just unmute yourself and ask.
I have a question. So you come from a CS technical background, and I was wondering how that, like if you have any tips, I guess, for designers when it comes to redesigning products, in terms of just like, yeah, not breaking things, you know, working with other developers to make sure that your redesign can be implemented, is feasible. Like any tips you have, just like, it could just be like talking to software engineers or XYZ, but yeah.
Sure. I'd say like, I think a huge pro in terms of not only just having technical background, I think that's definitely a huge plus, but I'd say like, if you have the opportunity to perhaps sit on like dev meetings or like vice versa them for you, I think that's a huge plus in terms of you get to see like inner workings of how they're going about problems they might be facing, and the same for them for you if they're interested otherwise. But I guess, does that answer your question, or is there anything you want me to elaborate?
No, yeah, that does. And I was just wondering if you personally ever had any, like, I guess, pain points when you were working with redesign, as either on the tech side or on the designer side with like the other team, and how you resolved that. Yeah.
Sure. I guess at times, if like, I know definitely if you put out like a really pretty design or just like really, or like something that's like really hard on developers, and at least you often have to like compromise the whole sometimes, because it's really easy to go hardcore in terms of like, okay, I'm gonna make this really epic like prototype overall, and then just like go overboard in terms of like making whether it's like really cool in those respects. It's a real pain for developer end as a whole, and at that point you might have to like compromise and see like what edges need to be cut more or less in terms of like cutting back on that more or less and having work with devs as a whole.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Yep, from
Thanks so much for your question. Anyone else have anything to ask? And also feel free to come to our next workshop, which is held at 4, on the theme of understanding our user. Yeah, and the Zoom link could be found on Notion and also on our Discord channel. Yeah, so I think we have 8 minutes left, and it seems that we don't have any questions at the moment. So maybe Mike, you can go ahead with some interactive discussions that you prepared.
Sure. So
Yeah.
I guess briefly how this connects overall nowadays would be, so one aspect of it would be, so every social media now is implementing like stories now, whether it's like through Instagram, LinkedIn, even Yelp. Let's see, there's Yelp. I saw a post by Femke, like this YouTuber in design, how she posted a tweet at how like she works at Uber Eats and they recently implemented one. And then Spotify was piloting something like that a while back. And then similarly for just like trends in design, at least, in which not entirely sure how like in-depth research and design teams are working through this, or like researching and like designing it more or less, or if they're more or less like trying to compete, go toe to toe with like competitors more or less. Because for Clubhouse and rise of spontaneous audio rooms, it's more or less like there's Clubhouse, there's Discord stages, there's Twitter, Twitter Spaces and Discord stages and all these things. And I guess the conversation at hand would be like, what do you think is going through the minds of like design and develop, yeah, like design researchers and all these places and how they fit in like redesign altogether?
Wait, sorry, could you repeat your question again real fast? The last part, just last part.
Sure, no problem. I guess like, what do you think is going through minds of design and developer? Yeah, all these different like people in the process, like design, developers, researchers all together. Do you think they're working towards just like appeasing stakeholders more or less, like, oh, our competitors doing this, so we must do this? Or do you think that they're more or less like trying to put their own spin on like these type concepts like stories or like audio rooms?
I guess my guess would be that stories present a really valuable place for marketing. That would be like, it's like a really big cash churner in terms of like, you can put ads there. There's a lot of sponsorship, promotional areas there. That would be my guess for the biggest motivation. I don't know how the sales come down, but I guess the question I would have is like, I think something that Facebook really did well is that the reacts came kind of organically from the way they saw users interacting with their software. And I wonder if something like, yeah, like Uber Eats, I don't know if like that organic adoption would be the same with stories, like if they saw that need, or if it was more like they saw the money. But that is my opinion, I guess.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I know that I've interacted with it like a similar function on Yelp before, where it's like some, let's see. Oh, that's a spot. Hold on. So this would be from Femke. She's a YouTuber in the UI UX space, but this was like a screenshot of what she put out really. But it looks to be more or less just like a call, like a marketing slash like call to action, as you said, like, oh, here's our new like recipe or like new item, and like pushing people to like use it. Then I think, oh, and then here's a screenshot from Yelp I had, in which it works similarly, in which you'd click on something like this and then you'd see like whether it's like a deal that happened, yeah, or just like free delivery or like different other things. But it's definitely really cool to see all these in action though.
Yeah, I guess, do you have like any strong opinions on like whether or not you think it's going to be viable on like what platforms and why, and like what the questions to be asking are?
I guess questions wise would be like how sustainable it is. I'm trying to see like each and like what feasibility. I I'd say like the battleground for like Spotify is an interesting development. I've read an article, it was from around January 2020, that it's for Spotify at least, it was more focused on like their, it would be similar towards just like Yelp and how they're promoting like their establishments, but this would be Spotify and like their artists promoting music towards fans. So I could definitely see that vertical. I feel like for some of them, like maybe like for like LinkedIn, I didn't understand their incentive, I guess, because it's like I don't go on there to follow that more or less, more like career stuff type things. So I feel like for that, they're riding a trend. Then as for Clubhouse and like more audio type things, I think there's a disconnect for me with like Clubhouse at least, because my understanding like Discord had like it's like they carved out the niche more or less previously, but it wasn't like widely as adopted as people saw like, oh, this for gamers, like not that they
Yeah.
brought it up entirely, but that it didn't entirely come to like mainstream more or less now that like Clubhouse has more like I know initially in VC space and like these different type things, but it's definitely an interesting development to see more or less.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. It is our turn. Sorry, I'll stop. Go ahead and run the conference you guys are running. But yeah.
I actually had one last minute question. This is more related. This isn't really related to the specific like reaction redesign, but I know that it's pretty popular nowadays for like up and coming designers to just like take an app or take any like website or like feature and just like completely redesign it, just to like add something to their portfolio. But I know that that can go like awry in a lot of different ways because they're not really working within the constraints of like the company itself, and they're kind of just like working outside of it and just like completely like redesigning it and doing whatever they want. But I was just wondering if you had any personal experience, like if you've done a redesign like that, and if you have any tips for people who want to do that.
Okay, funny story. I actually designed a sort of Spotify stories type thing in which I pretty much for that the quality was that let's see, I had access to like their general styling guide and all those type things, but difficulties I faced would definitely be like you don't you definitely have to mention this like in the case more or less, but it's like okay, I don't have research as to like or like you don't have as like fully fleshed out research in terms of like the type of users who use Spotify and like those different type things. So it's more or less having to like do your digging in terms of having to source those yourselves from like whether it's peers and other things, and then even talk through and like discuss like, oh, I'm not embedded on this team, but like if I were to be working or like if you were to be actually in this enterprise setting, this is what steps I'd take in addition towards just like talking not I'd say like what Facebook did well was that they showcase like the failures in addition towards like what eventually worked. But I'd say like in respect of this at least just being able to talk through like, oh, here are some constraints I'm at because I don't physically work at this company, but if I had more time or if I had like more resources, I'd like allocate this more in terms of future design, future work in terms of this and moving forward from there. But I hope that answered your question though.
Yeah. That was helpful. Thank you.
Okay, I think that we're kind of at time. So thanks so much for everyone who has come to this event. And also thanks so much for Mike for preparing and presenting this wonderful workshop with us. I'm sure that everyone learns a great deal about it. And yeah, let's just give a round of applause for this amazing event. Yay! Thanks so much, and feel free to, I guess, stay connected with Mike if you feel comfortable with that. And yeah, hopefully we can see you in some of our other workshops. Yeah. So enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, I think you can stop the recording too.